Okay, I had a request to record it, so we are going to record it this morning. So it's really good to see so many of you here. Those of you who know me a little bit, or even really don't know me very much, but see me regularly, know I love clothes, I love fashion, and I really do enjoy them. And right from a very young age, I was dressmaking, making my own clothes, until it became too expensive. When I was growing up, buying fabric was quite cheap. Making your own clothes was a really good alternative to being, because I couldn't afford to buy my own clothes, and the clothes my mother bought me I didn't always like. So, but I could buy fabric and I could do my own thing, and this is my way of expressing myself. And in the sort of late 80s, 90s, the fabric, buying fabric in shops became really relatively expensive. A lot of the shops closed, and it became increasingly difficult to do that. I did live in a town where there was a market store, and this market trader, he used to go and hang out the back end of the sort of fashion houses in London and buy off the bolts of fabric that Laura Ashley and so on and so forth didn't buy. So you would get almost Laura Ashley fabric and almost John Lewis fabric. And that was also a great source of delight, because I could do my own thing and I didn't have to look like the Laura Ashley sort of queen. In the 80s, that was the thing. I've always loved clothes and fashion, but and I did make my own a lot, and I still do sometimes make my own, but it is extremely expensive to make your own now, and time consuming. But you know, what do I do for clothes? Well, when I go into the charity shops, you know, I look at a t-shirt like this. Sorry, this is not one I bought in charity shop. And you know, it's bobbly, it's faded, it's got a pulled neck. And you know, no one's going to buy this. And this basic T-shirt sits behind a huge $3 trillion trade. 2% of the world's gross domestic product goes into fashion and textiles across the globe. The top fashion that you see on the catwalks, that is only bought by around about 2,000 people across the world. So the top stuff that you see, all that sort of brand stuff, that goes to a really, really small percentage of people. And what happens is that the designers, the makers of the sort of other fashion houses, the clothing manufacturers, they're there scribbling, making, and then very quickly want to get the same kinds of things onto the racks and onto our backs. And that often only takes about 5 to 6 weeks from there to the shops, and that's called just-in-time fashion. And that is overtaking fast fashion. It's a sort of a super speed fast fashion. So from an idea to our backs is 5 to 6 weeks. You can imagine what sits behind that. Now, back before the 20th century, in the late 19th century, fashion wasn't really fashion, it was clothes. And the regular people wore clothes, and the top-end people had dresses and dressmakers. But there was a lot of reusing and recycling. Dresses, particularly amongst women, and men's outfits being redesigned, remade, retailored into the new styles. There was a lot of recycling that went on. And when we get into the 20th century and sort of department stores and clothing being made on a bigger scale, you start to see the demise of that. And then when you get into the 1950s and the post-war period of mass production, we really see that sort of slipping away and people buying new and very little remake and reuse. And that was part of the rebuilding in the post-war period. So the Dior new look was very much geared, you know, with the woman with the sort of slimmed-in waist and the big skirts. This was a way of rebuilding the economy after the war, the fashion economy and the clothing economy. So that's sort of a little bit of a potted history of how we've got to this sort of position, because then when it's available, you know, beginning in the 50s, people wanted everyone to buy this stuff to keep the economy going, and we got used to it. And that brings us back to our basic t-shirts. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the basic t-shirt. Basic t-shirt will typically cost around £9.45. You can buy them a lot cheaper in Primark. You can buy them a lot more expensive in Nike. But the base sort of average cost is £9.45. If you buy one from a sustainable outfitter or a sustainable supplier, it will cost you about £11.39. Again, give or take the boundaries. But researchers found that the differential in what people will pay is quite huge across the generations. And the older generation are less likely to spend more on sustainable t-shirt than the younger generation. So there's quite a big difference between the baby boomers and Gen Z, which is very, very telling about how our younger generations are really thinking about what sustainability is doing. We need to take note of that and really think deeply about what we're paying, and when we're paying a price, what are we paying for? And that doesn't just necessarily mean go and buy a more expensive t-shirt, because that doesn't, it's actually looking at what sits behind it. Now, digging deeper into that research, in the UK, consumers prioritise fairer conditions for workers as the highest when it comes to ethical shopping. Number 2 is raw materials. Number 3 is reduce, reuse, and recycle in the circular economy, which I'll talk about in a minute. Then you've got 4 is chemical usage. Number 5 is CO2 emissions. And at the bottom is protecting biodiversity, which that ranking tells you all of the kinds of things that sit within this notion of sustainability. When you're shopping sustainably, what are you buying? What are you paying for? And I would suggest that the conditions for workers is at the top, because there was the big TV programme, a series of TV programmes about Primark paying a penny a day for children in Bangladesh to stitch sequins onto t-shirts for us to pay £4.99 for. And that doesn't even begin to dig deep into the production of the t-shirt itself and the problem of sequins. Sequins are a really big problem in the world because they are plastic. They do not degrade, they do not break down. And sequins and glitter are a really huge problem, amongst other things. So these 6 factors are what needs to be figured into how and why we might buy clothes that are sustainable. So let me tell you about this t-shirt. I'll bring out the clean one. The t-shirt. This is a basic white t-shirt. This has probably travelled, its travel itinerary is probably 15,172 kilometres. Now, we're trying to reduce how much travel we do. How many of us travel 15,172 kilometres across the globe in a year? Probably not many of us. And if we did, we would already be thinking about it. This t-shirt, all right, not on its own, it's gone with a whole load of others. But that's how far it's travelled. So the cotton is often grown in China, where it's picked and it's separated from the husks and the seeds and then bundled into bales. And those bales then get shipped to India, where they are spun, washed, bleached, dried, and then knitted. This is actually a knitted fabric. T-shirts are a knitted fabric, not a woven fabric. And then that cloth is often then shipped to Bangladesh, where they're produced into t-shirts. And that's when the decoration and any printing and so on is applied. And then the t-shirt, now looking like a t-shirt rather than bits of cloth, gets sent to somewhere, often to Sri Lanka, where they're processed. They get all ironed and bundled and put into packaging. And then it's shipped to the UK, where it will be sold. That is a typical journey of 15,172 kilometres. That is just an ordinary t-shirt. This is a Fruit of the Loom one, and I can look and I can tell you that it was actually produced in... No, it doesn't tell me where it's produced. That's very interesting. I would have to look up exactly where that one was produced. But you can look on your labels, and that would probably be where it's actually turned into a t-shirt, the place where this label was sewn on. So when you're buying a t-shirt, it's worth doing your research and looking on the website of the company. Now, they all have to put a modern slavery statement up, but also look at their production routes. You won't get the whole story. You'll never get the whole story, but it's worth you doing that homework to know where you're buying from. This T-shirt also has a water footprint, so it's got a car, it's got a sort of a travelling footprint. It's got a water footprint. This one T-shirt, 2,500 litres of water. That's based on an 11,000 litre usage per kilogram of cotton. Okay, so you've got 1 kilo and it's using 11,000. So that's how I've worked out, or how you can calculate this is 2,500 litres. 33% of that is blue water. That is fresh, new water. 54% of it is green rainwater, and only 14% is grey water. Now, in some of that processing, chemicals, dyes, and other pollutants are actually going back into the water streams across the globe. So just, so bear in mind also this one T-shirt, which is probably, not a particularly expensive T-shirt, nothing unusual about it. That's where it's journeyed and how much water has been taken to produce it. Now, in that research, I can tell you that polyester, viscose, some of the synthetic fabrics will show a lower water footprint at 350 litres, which is quite considerably less, around about 10%. However, they're made in the oil industry. If it's polyesters, they're a byproduct of the oil industry, the petrol industry. If you're talking about viscose and the cellulose products, they're made from trees. Now, environmentally, in some ways, they're better. They use less water because the byproduct of the breakdown of the cellulose, because they break down the cellulose using acetone, and the byproduct is water. So you can boil the water off, and you've got your solvent back again. Of course, there's huge amounts of energy required to do that. So all of what I'm saying is even our basics, our knickers, our bras, our socks, our T-shirts, these are all costly to the earth, and these are our basics. So when we come to the fripperies, the extras, the beautiful clothes, we need to take much more care. And there's a lot of work going on at the moment using in terms of the circular economy. And the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Ellen MacArthur the sailor, who had seen the plastic ocean, herself, has set up this foundation whereby they're looking at the circular economy, and that's trying to reduce the amount of pollutants, the amount of energy that's being used in the production. But we have a role in that. We have a role as users. Now, the users are not normally built into the circular economy, but as users, when we buy a garment, it's how do we look after it? What do we do with it? How do we make sure that we're not adding into this fuel? And there are several things we can do. We can reduce, reuse, recycle. Okay, so we can reduce how much we buy new. We can reuse things. So we can buy from charity shops. We can, pass things on, particularly children's clothes. As a parent, when you've got a new child and someone gives you clothes, that's just a whole lot of money you don't have to spend. And most children's clothes don't get that much wear. I appreciate if you've got boys in trousers, it gets huge wear. But trousers can become shorts. There's nothing wrong with trousers becoming shorts, and that's the same for all of us. And then there's the recycle. So if the clothes really are worn out, making sure that they go to recycling and that they do go, because then they can be turned into rags, and they're used in a number of different trades. In your car, behind the plastic fascia and the dashboard, that's all broken down fabric pushed in there to create that softening. The blankets, when a removal company comes to move your house, those are made from sort of like shredded clothing, shredded fabric, and then it's made into those blankets. There's lots and lots of things that can happen when you take your clothes to the recycling unit, but only take worn out clothes. Please don't take clothes that are perfectly good. There are charity shops, there are other charities that you can give those to. But that doesn't underpin. That doesn't get to, I forgot to set my stopwatch. I don't know how many minutes I've been. No, all right. The charity shops. Now I want to talk about dopamine. Okay. Does anybody know what dopamine is? No. Yep.
It's a pleasure drug in your brain.
It is. It's a pleasure. It's the pleasure drug in your brain. And neuroimaging research reports spikes in dopamine activity when people are shopping. Now, I'm sure some of you hate shopping. Okay. I'm sure some of you hate shopping, but it is actually aligned with that seen in addictive behaviours such as drug taking and overeating. So the rush of buying, even in a charity shop, the rush of buying, I found a bargain, I found something I like. And bear in mind that the fast fashion industry is working with that. And that's why the just-in-time, the fast fashion industry works. Because if you know that next week that T-shirt or that dress or that hat would have gone, then you'll want to buy it and you think, I've got it. And if you get it in a sale, so instead of being £79, it's 20, the spike is higher. Because you've got a bargain, and you're the winner. So there's a whole lot of psychology and hormonal play that is being played out with us in the shops. And if you look, the shops are always changing their windows. They're always telling you, look, we've got this new. And they'll never quite buy enough of what's needed. They don't want to have leftover stock, but they also want to give you that sense of urgency. You need to buy it now. Buy now, before stocks are running out. You go, and you'll see it's not just in the fashion industry that you'll see this. Only 6 tickets left for this at this price. Okay, so our dopamine is being sort of harnessed for this whole fast fashion, just-in-time fashion. And when I say fashion, I don't just mean sort of the glamorous stuff. I mean even t-shirts. They'll only put out a few. It's not just that it looks neat and tidy. They want you to feel an urgency to buy now because it might not be there next week. And so people actually do become addicted to shopping. I mean, I love shopping, and I recognise that in myself. And there is now a serious condition called consumer buying disorder, and that does lead to debt, and it leads to theft, and it leads to depression. So these things, I mean, it's easy to sort of laugh about it and smile about it, but it's all part of an affluent society, and a society that's not looking after its raw materials and its people. I was really struck by Isaiah's reading that we had this morning. I hadn't pre-looked, and I wasn't sort of alerted to it. When dopamine spikes, there's a form of hyper-arousal and stress, and it's that leads to purchasing. And it's this that fuels the global challenge for fashion and textiles. So whilst I say reduce, reuse, recycle, don't be misled that you don't get dopamine highs in a charity shop. I can tell you from first-hand experience, you do. Okay, it's very exciting, and eBay and all these other vintage, all of this breeds the same thing. It's like a desire to have more, a desire to have new, and it's that we need to, as a community, as a culture, we need to start to sort of really think carefully about, because all of that is fueling the same kinds of things. You see your colleague turn up with a new shirt, a new tie, a new dress. And you actually start to think, or at the end, payday. How many of those you get those payday alerts at the end in your email? Payday deals. It's all fuel to make us buy more, and particularly in terms of clothing. We can convince ourselves, even in a charity shop, that we're doing a good thing. But we're still fueling that same thing that drives the whole fashion industry. And it does operate potentially as a gateway kind of drug to increase consumption. And that brings me to repair. And repair is a really old-fashioned kind of thing. I mean, people don't darn, they don't mend, they don't. In a way, we don't really look after, as the users, we don't look after our clothes terribly well. There's repair and mending, but actually we need to learn to wash things less. This t-shirt has got bubbly through washing. Every time you wash an item, you're actually, the chemicals in the detergent, the action of your washing machine, the wringing, all of that, even ironing, it's all damaging the fibres. So we actually need to learn to wash our clothes less. If they don't smell and they haven't got stains on them, do they need washing? I mean, just because you've worn it one day does not make it dirty. We don't need to wash so much, and that will actually prolong the length of time our clothing is around. And if we bought better quality, after all, if you pay £4.50 for a t-shirt, you can't expect to have high quality cotton, high quality spinning, high quality knitting, high quality production. And then you wash the life out of it. It won't last very long, and then you'll go and buy another one. I'm amongst them myself. And there are repair cafes. And we have talked a couple of times about us having a repair cafe here at some point. And I think it would be quite fun to actually gather together and bring our old clothes that perhaps need a little bit of an adjustment. They might need letting out. COVID's shrunken all our clothes. Or they might need letting in if you've been sort of training or someone's given you something that's a bit big, taking up, letting down, or a hole or a seam. All of these things can be mended, and we can extend the life of them. And we need to start thinking about that when we buy a piece of clothing. Is it going to be, if it gets a hole, if it gets a bit of a tear, is it mendable? And if it's something that's not going to be mendable, what are we doing buying it? And you can actually shift that dopamine rush to actually having a refreshed item. So you're still, pretending that your hyperarousal of dopamine isn't nice. And we can swap clothes, so we can also have swap shops, and helping to style one another, and we can share our skills. So what I'm suggesting here is that in terms of climate justice, in terms of care for our Earth, we need to think about the very basics that we're wearing on our body. They are a huge part of identity creation, and I'm not denying that I don't. When I moved from being a maths teacher to a lecturer in fashion and textiles, it was quite a glamorous moment in my life. I won't lie, and and I love it, and I really love the fashion industry, and I love the sort of creativity and the energy and the vibrancy. But this hinterland of global damage that we're causing is unsustainable, and we need to address it, and we all need to address it in our own way. Even if you're someone that doesn't buy many clothes, what would happen if you reduced that by 20%? What happens if I reduce my clothes buying by 20%? We did it during lockdown, so we can do it. And I think if we reduced it by 20%, together collectively, we could make a huge difference to this sort of fading world. I just wanted to, whilst I'm here, promote a couple of things. One is, you can buy shoes that are sustainable. These are actually made from recycled water bottles completely. And they're also washable, so I can put them in the washing machine, and they will wash with I put them in a bag, so I don't do with my other clothes, but they do wash, so they're actually, pretty good. And there's a couple of varieties of those. And there's also other fibres that we can be using that are more sustainable. So there's bamboo, which is fast growing. Now, this is an interesting one, and I only bring it because it's of interest. This is milk protein. Now, this was developed during the Second World War. Never really took off. And obviously, cows and cow production is a big problem in the world at the moment. But you can make fibres from many, many things that we don't currently. And this is a cellulose fibre. So please do have a look at these. So this is one made from wood. So it's wood that's broken down. These have many of the same qualities. You can produce them now that have the same qualities as cotton. Some of them are better. Bamboo is actually antibacterial. It's got antibacterial properties. So there are other fibres that we can start to think about and be using. So it's worth, when you're buying things, when you're looking at things, even if you're buying second hand, have a look at the cycle of that fabric. Where's it come from? Who's made it? And what's it made from? It's interesting apart from anything else, but it helps us to know what we're actually consuming. So I'm not here to preach as it is. I'm just here to suggest that if we can reduce by 20%, and if we can reduce it further, it would be amazing. What the fashion and textile industry is doing, we can look after this a whole lot better, and have a world to pass on to our grandchildren. So, if you've got any questions. Has anyone got any questions? Mark?
With food consumption, there's been quite a movement about better labelling.
Yep.
It's quite interesting when you look at the way it's labelled and that do anything with it. Is there a similar movement in relation to clothing?
There is, but there's a lot of resistance because of all of, well, first of all, where do you say this T-shirt? This one says made in China. That probably means the T-shirt is made in China. So it's about the labelling of which bit are you labelling? Are you labelling the fibre, the processing, the garment itself, or indeed the seller? So when it says made in the UK, you have to be so careful. What does that mean? It's a bit like farm, in the food, it's like UK farm standard. It doesn't necessarily mean it was produced in the UK. Yeah. And the other.
Sorry, Mark, could you repeat the question? I don't think it's been heard online.
Mark was asking about the labelling, and in relation to the food industry, where there's been a sort of big move to actually where things are being produced, and is that the same with fashion? And I think there's a lot of work to try and make that happen. But as you can see, as things are going around the globe, it's really hard to sort of pin down. So it might say something that looks really great, but you have to sort of go back into the hinterland to try and work out. And it's a bit like when they make these statements about modern slavery on their websites. There's a lot of blindness, and I mean that in the sort of sense of I didn't see it. So perhaps not looking rather than blindness is a better word. Just not looking, not seeing things.
You didn't mention animal fibres at all, i.e. wool and mohair or sorts of stuff.
No, all fibres will be implicated in a water consumption and a water footprint, and a sort of global travelling. Obviously, wool fibres can be grown in the more temperate climates such as us, so they don't have necessarily the same journeys. But on the other hand, it depends where they're being processed. So, and there is a huge amount of water and pollutant goes into it, and of course you've got the impact of the animals, as we know, with cattle producing so much methane, that is actually contributing hugely to the environmental sort of damage. So leather is quite problematic because it's obviously a byproduct of that. Wool and mohair obviously is goat's stomach fibres. I mean, goats are actually probably the most sustainable sort of animal that we grow. They're not as processed as sheep, but the animal fibres also need to be processed. And of course, silk does kill. You have to kill the silkworm, so it's a very, very costly process, both for the silkworm, but also it's actually very much hand processed. So silk's very expensive to produce. It's not just because it's lovely, but it's expensive. for the climate. Again, lots of water involved, boiling, because you have to boil the little cocoons that the silk lies in. You boil it to kill off the cocoon, to kill off the worm, and then to get the fibres off it. So again, there's a lot of energy being used just to release the fibres. So yeah, it's the animal fibres are, and they're harder to process because of the keratin in the fibres. You have to sort of penetrate that to get the dyes in and to get the detergents to wash them, the lanolin and so on. So they again have their own costs, but it's energy rather than in sort of perhaps some of the things that plant fibres use, which is why we tend to use plant fibres. Yes, Faye.
Yeah, I also like shopping, and I always go around shop in London, and there's huge shop of huge amount of clothes. Sometimes you're going and they're on sale, and I know a lot of those clothes don't sell. What do they do? I find that disturbing because so many shops have so many clothes, and I think all the resources that go into that. What do they do with all those clothes when they don't sell?
Well, sadly, a lot of it goes into landfill, and that is a real problem. That a lot of if it's straight from the sort of the retailers and from the sorry, I'm not repeating the questions very well, am I? Thank you.
That's fair.
So yes, so when the shops things, it just goes into landfill, quite a lot of it, or it gets sold. Perfectly good clothes get sold into the rag trades. And I mean, when I mean the rag trade, I don't mean the rag trade that was what we used to call the fashion industry. The rag made into rags, made into the stuff that goes into coal and blankets. So we need to sort of make sure, in a way, there's a whole lot of work about making sure that doesn't happen, because they just want rid of it. They don't want to be storing it. It costs to store it, so they just bail it all up.
Yeah. So shall we, interest going into that so people don't make so much clothes? I mean, there's no need, nobody's going to buy the amount of clothes in London alone. In the shop, why do we have to make so much? Why?
Because everybody's taking their cut. Everybody wants a bit of money along the route. And because the consumers are there, you go into Zara, H&M, Primark, John Lewis, Marks and Spencer's on a Saturday afternoon, and they're queuing to try clothes on. They're queuing to pay for clothes because people want. They're used to having new. They're used to having a fresh thing. It's Saturday night and going out and going to buy a new garment. Possibly won't wear it again. Which of course is the benefit if you go into the charity shop, you get the stuff that has only been worn once or twice. Kate, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, I've heard a different take on charity shops in that if you are buying stuff, at least you are stopping the wastage and you are giving money to the charities. I mean, there's so much we're talking about. It's like a whole discussion and a whole load of things to come with it. But the other thing is, a friend of mine who studied fashion, her daughter's a dancer. I really wish I'd gotten along with her. Her daughter is a dancer, and during lockdown, she couldn't perform. And for dancers, just need different clothes all the time. And she and her friends, and I can't remember the name of the website, but they have started upcycling clothes. And she was telling me that her daughter has decided just not to buy new anymore. And, someone who has to use those clothes, she and her friends, if they put them on the floor or she's in a company or something, they try and source, retro stuff from other websites or never ever buy new. But they do, satisfy the dopamine rush by acquiring these things or upcycling. And I just think that's so positive. And I must tell you just a quick, it's a personal thing. And I feel like telling you a story about some of the clothes that I noticed. But I have this funny thing where it's very difficult in a charity shop because obviously they run with volunteers. They're not always very, they don't always have staff who are on hand to help you. And I have this real difficulty that, like you, I love shopping and I get so much help from the ladies' room staff there so brutally, and it's made me a complete shopaholic. And I'm beginning now to hold back, but I'm hoping to find ways of at least doing that in charity shops and finding the means of doing that, because you realise their marketing is so forlorn and it's been trained, and it's like supermarkets and everything else.
Yeah.
And there is a dilemma about cotton, I suppose, because on all these things, I mean, the first few do is talk about, I got an email from somebody called, it won't mention information, but I was looking at what their offers were, and everything is the word sustainable cotton, round the place, and I was just thinking, I wonder what that means.
No, brilliant. So Kate was asking. Kate was making a few points. First of all, about yes, charity shops do break the cycle of the brand new, and I'm absolutely. I mean, I barely buy anything new now. I come entirely secondhand today, which I'm very particularly made sure I did. But most days I am entirely secondhand. And and absolutely, at least it's not feeding the production of new and therefore waste. Absolutely on that. Yes, if shops are saying sustainable, what does that mean? And in terms of upcycling, again, there's lots of young people. If you go down Petticoat Lane Market, if you go to Camden Market, you'll find young people, and there are other places, other markets exist, where young students are upcycling. And what better could you do than support some young people as well? So again, upcycling is very, very exciting. Trade in this trade, TRAID, they do quite a lot of upcycling as well. So upcycling secondhand, I'm not saying don't do them. What I'm saying is don't think that's the whole solution. There's still dopamine involved. Rebecca, I can see your hand up very quietly there.
Yeah, thank you so much for what you shared, and thank you for highlighting the repair part of it. I think that's really exciting. I was wondering to what extent you saw that kind of method of disruption to the textiles and fashion industry is something that's becoming more common. I was wondering, like there's a significant campaign on like Teach the Future. I was wondering to what extent do kind of homemaking textile skills become part of education systems? To what extent is it being talked about in kind of corporations and the market as well? Or is it still silent? Is there space for that movement to come?
It's coming. I mean, the sad thing in schools is technology subjects were made non-compulsory about 6 years ago, and so where in schools people had to do a technology subject, now they don't, which I think is a real loss. I mean, obviously it ended up being mostly girls doing textiles and boys doing woodwork. Well, girls and boys did woodwork, but only girls really did textiles, which is a really great shame because I think there's a huge amount. Not just. I think there are also intellectual challenges in working with textiles and thinking about the sustainability. So that's a great loss. But what I do notice is that the younger generation my students, but when I would, but even in schools, if you look at the way students have been protesting about climate change, there's a much greater awareness and an urgency coming from our younger generations. We need to listen to them, and that has got a groundswell, and I think it's incumbent upon us to sort of listen and act. And so, yes, repair is really important because if it ends up in a charity shop and it's ripped or torn or needs mending, the charity shop doesn't have the capacity to do that. So, but jumble sales, it will still be there. So we do need to learn those skills and relearn those skills and build that back into our circular economy. So we need to make the noise about it. But there are, things like kintsugi, which is the Japanese art of mending, has become very popular. Now there are kits. You can buy a kit to mend a broken thing with gold sort of stuff. We don't need kits really, but that again is part of where we are as a sort of as a culture. But on the other hand, if that raises the notion of mending as adding value rather than just sort of trying to hide wear and tear, then there's a really positive thing going on.
There's a comment from Ulrika earlier on saying that she really thinks the idea of the repair cafe is great.
Well, one of the things we've talked about is having a repair cafe and then a fashion show. Just a thought. Yes.
One thing you didn't mention was polo neck jumpers, because I see people wearing a lot of polo neck jumpers, not now, not this time of year, but as winter is coming, there's going to be a lot of people wearing polo neck jumpers, around about October, November time to about March, April time. What do you think of polo neck jumpers?
Well, polo neck jumpers have the same provenance as a t-shirt, essentially. So they have the same problems, probably with a bit more fabric. But there's lots of things you can do. For example, if you have an ordinary V-neck or round neck jumper, and it's quite cold, and you want the equivalent of a polo neck, well, if you've got an old polo neck, you can cut it off and have it as a sort of little extra. Or even a t-shirt, take the bottom of the t-shirt, which often isn't really very worn, cut it off, and then make it into a sort of a polo neck that you tuck into a jumper. There are lots of then you could have different coloured ones. You could get quite exciting with your polo necks and your t-shirts. I mean, a t-shirt, if the neck's all a bit scraggy and perhaps you can make it into a little skirt. There's all sort of things. I'm not being ridiculous. There's all sorts of things you can do. If something's gone out of fashion and it's too long or it's too short, trousers that have become stuffed at the bottom, you can put a faux turn-up on them and give them a whole new lease of life. If your pockets, your change is falling down through your socks, you can make a new pocket quite easily if you've got, you don't need a sewing machine, but the sewing machine makes it a bit quicker.
They come people, I see people in the street wearing their necklace up for they're wearing these masks.
Yeah.
But this was years ago. I think I've seen maybe a couple of years, like last year, before last, because I see many of them, it was absent, and maybe about 2019 it came back into the fashion.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. So things come and go, and again, you can remodel things. So, Kate, I can see your hand up.
Just quickly, I think we could do kind of a whole performance piece around this. There's a story called The Tailor's Button, and I won't tell you now, but it's all about this. And it's a very simple story, but I just think with all our shows have got stories, and it can be kind of multimedia thing we do on clothing and topics and all sorts of things.
Absolutely. I think we're probably getting to a close, but I think Al, your hand went up, so I'm going to just let you have the final questions.
Well, I must say, I'm now 70 and I've only recently thrown an old card around that has my school name in it.
For those online, that was Al, who he just confessed that he's just turning 70 years young. And he's just thrown away something with his school name tape in it. So I don't know whether that's the oldest garment we have in the room, but certainly it's got a good provenance if it's got your name tape in it. So what I would just it's worth really thinking about these everyday activities. We've all been thinking about moving from perhaps a less meat-oriented diet into a more plant-based diet, milk from cow's milk to oat milk or other forms, trying to reduce our consumption, thinking about when we travel, car use, plane use, and so on. And it's just about what we actually wear as well. It's saying, think about what it is you're wearing. Do you need another shirt or not? Do you need another dress or not? And where can I buy, if I do, or if I want, even if I want one, how can I reduce the impact on the world? Because if each T-shirt is travelling 15,172 kilometres and costing us 2,500 litres of water, let alone the human cost, the energy, the fuel that's being used to do all that, you know, that's just one T-shirt. How many T-shirts have you got in the drawer? He's got one last question.
No, I just want to say, what do you do with all those little pieces of socks and stuff that you don't want to? I have them piled. I don't want to throw them in like.
They need to go. They need to go to the recycling centre in the textile bin, where they will then go to rags. They will not go to landfill. If you take them to your recycling centre, and the ones in London are amazing. Just take them down, you know, and they bundle them up and they go off. I'm not saying that's a carbon-free way, because they do get shipped around the world, but at least they're not going into landfill. Okay. Brilliant. It's really nice to talk with you. Thank you so much. Thank you. You did amazing. Nice to see everyone.
Show one document.
Has there been any movement about shredding?
That's right. Just show you want to stop recording to the cloud. Yes.